What's going on, everyone? It's Phil from Earth Nails and Tails, and today we're going to be changing things up a little bit. I wanted to take some time and go over and completely review how our season went in 2021. And I think this is really important for you guys to take a step back and analyze what you did, figure out what worked really, really well, and figure out the things that you still need to continue to improve on and apply that to your next season. So we're going to go through this whole year from start to finish, and then we're going to see what we can improve upon for 2022. I really wanted to make this video because just looking back into the past year, we have done so much on this property, and it's amazing to see the results finally coming to life. The greenhouse right behind me is one of those things that is not even a year old, which is crazy to think about. We started construction of it last December, and it has already proved to us to be so useful here. And that's just one of the things that we have accomplished here on the homestead. So what I've got here is my drawing of our garden layout from this season, as well as my notebook where I take some notes and just kind of reiterate on the things that I've done over the course of the year. And I really just want to touch on all of these things here and just reminisce and remember how things worked out. So the first thing that I'm looking at here is the squash that we planted, and this was in the front left corner of our garden bed. So if we walk in, we go right to the left and we could see these beautiful squash, and I remember just sitting in the middle of those garden beds, just completely surrounded by the squash plants that we had. And this year we grew zucchini, yellow squash, as well as patty pan squash in that area for our summer squash varieties, and then we grew 3 winter squash varieties, 2 of which were spaghetti squash, and one of them was the Pennsylvania Dutch crookneck squash, which we still haven't eaten yet, and it just shows how long that those vegetables last over a period of time. But all of them grew really, really well, so super happy with the squash this year. Patty pans were definitely the best. We got so many patty pans. They were, super sweet, delicious, and they were super easy to grow. We actually weren't so fortunate with the yellow squash in the beginning of the season because we just had so many vine borers. And I've kind of learned some things throughout the year on how to prevent those from happening. Crop rotation is a main thing that we can do in order to prevent vine borers, but other than that, you really just have to stay on top of your plants, baby them, nurture them, and then as soon as you see any sign of vine borers, you got to get them off because that's going to keep you going into the future. The other method that I really learned with squashes, especially where we live, because vine borers are they're just out of control. They're one of probably the worst pests that we have here in the South. So what I did was succession plant my squash, and I actually moved them over to another bed in the second half of the year, and then we were getting loads of yellow squashes. So succession planting them, basically having squashes grow at different times of the year, because the vine borers aren't going to be there all year long, right? They're only going to be there for certain parts of the season. So if you can plant crops throughout the season, it's going to mitigate the negative effect that those vine borers are going to have on your crop. But overall, I think the squash did extremely well this year. And not only are we talking about the zucchini and the yellow squash, but we're obviously going to talk about the loofah, because that is a type of squash. It's a gourd. So we have to consider all of those things. And overall, squash this year was a win. Next, we move into the back left part of our garden where we had our onions that we grew for the first time, and they grew amazing. They tasted unlike anything I'm going to buy at the store. The texture, the flavor, the sweetness is just completely different, and they're just super easy to grow too. So I would definitely recommend growing onions if you have not done those before. Collards we had there too. Those didn't really grow that well. However, I didn't really take care of them that much. I like collards, but I don't love them, so I think that's why I didn't nurture them as much as I should have, but they did okay. And then we have our beets, which also did really, really well. We had various colors of beets. We had purple, we had red, we had yellow, we had orange, and I personally really love beets. Most people think they taste like dirt, but they're actually super healthy for you. A lot of antioxidants, biotin, which helps grow muscle. So I personally love beets, and we have some in the garden right now which are also growing well that I'm getting ready to pick, and most of those are red beets or purple beets this fall. On the other hand, we had our bok choy and our kale and our marigolds kind of mixed in. Planted the marigolds in as a test to see if it would help prevent those pests from getting to our kale and our bok choy. Bok choy did really well. We got probably 9 or 10 heads of bok choy, and bok choy is pretty easy to grow, that Chinese cabbage. And then our kale, we got no kale this year. We did have a couple larger pest problems, and I noticed in one of my beds, I think it was like a rabbit or something was burrowing underneath, and I would find holes in that kale bed. So whatever was there was super happy with that kale. We probably did get some, but it was just munching on it, and it was gone before we could even see it. And the marigolds that were growing there did really well as well. So that part of the garden, I would say it's probably hit or miss, but we did get onions and we did get beets out of that area, and we did get bok choy and beautiful marigolds, beautiful flowers. So overall, I would say that's a success. Moving on kind of around the garden, we go to our loofah bed, and the loofahs this year were the biggest success. Let's go! From the research that we have done on loofahs, we did not expect to get the number that we did. We were expecting to get like, hey, maybe we'll get 10 loofah, make some sponges for ourselves, collect the seeds so that we can grow them again next year, and that would be that. But we were not expecting to get 100 loofah plants. Obviously, we're not going to get seeds from every single plant because they all didn't go to maturity, but you guys loved seeing those loofahs. We've gotten seed sales, we've gotten loofah sales, we're making loofah soap, so it's awesome, really fun experience, and we're going to be, continuing to present more on that, and definitely stand by for the future. We're going to be making a loofah video because we are selling our loofah seeds, so if you want to check that out, definitely check out our Etsy page, and I'll put a link in the description below. For you guys to check that out. And then I'm also going to be making a video step-by-step guide on how to grow loofah. So if you want to see that, make sure you like and subscribe and hit that bell for the notifications, so that way when we make a new video, you'll get that notification right in your notifications menu. The loofah, just going back at it, the plants grew huge. We had them over a trellis. Their vines were going 40 feet in every direction, so it was really cool to see that. However, sometimes it was pretty frustrating because it was blocking out some of the other plants that we had growing, but that's just part of the game, right? You need to learn how these plants grow. So one thing that we're actually going to do this year is behind the greenhouse is our shed, and I have raised beds on either side of that shed, and the shed's only about 5 feet tall, maybe 6 feet tall. So we're gonna actually put a trellis in the back of the shed and then have the loofah grow up and over it, and then that's gonna provide cover for our chickens as well. So lots of good benefits there. It's gonna hide our ugly shed. We're gonna have plenty of space for our loofah to grow, and it's gonna give our chickens some really nice coverage that they need in those hot summer months. Going on to the next bed, we have our carrots and celery and spinach, and I've said this numerous times, I love growing my carrots with my spinach. Every time I grow them in this combination, they seem to grow really well together because the spinach loves to absorb all that nitrogen, and the carrots like to take that potassium and phosphorus and just shove it down into their roots. So I really like this mixture. They balance each other really well. Carrots that we get are super delicious, especially when we grow them in the fall, because they start to get that frost and sends the sugars down in the roots, and the carrots are just amazingly delicious. And the kiddo loves them too. It's definitely her favorite vegetable. So it's always super exciting to grow. Celery was actually pretty difficult, not gonna lie. We grew 10 celery heads, and we probably got 3 of them that were used. And the flavor and the texture was a lot different than you normally get at the grocery store. I actually think I like grocery store celery better than what we grew this year. The stalks were pretty thin compared to what you would get at the store. You didn't get as much of a crunch, but that celery, that like earth flavor in the celery was compounded significantly. So you took that bite and it was like, whew, it was almost like a rush of spearmint or peppermint when you like bite into that, like a piece of gum or like a piece of peppermint leaf for the first time. But just imagine that celery flavor, that's what it was like. So pretty interesting. We did wind up using it in some stalks, but that's about it. I think one thing I need to focus on the celery a little bit more is water, because obviously if you water it a little bit more, it's going to distribute that flavor through the celery a little bit better, and it's not going to be so centralized in a certain area of the celery. And then focusing a little bit more on giving it the proper nutrition. It is a very heavy feeder. The roots dive down super deep. So I think keeping your celery on a nutrition plan will give you really good results. So I am going to grow it again this year. I am going to try to stay more on top of my celery with watering it and providing it with the proper nutrition, and we'll see how that turns out. After the spinach and carrots and celery came out of that bed, we put our sweet potatoes in. So we always plant our carrots and spinach in the fall, so that way spring comes around, everything comes out, and then a new plant goes in that bed, so we get 2 crops for one season in that one bed. And this year we put in sweet potatoes, and as you guys saw, again, those sweet potatoes grew really well. So we got close to 90 pounds of sweet potatoes, which is unreal, and we had a mixture of white, orange, and purple sweet potatoes, and oh my gosh, they're absolutely delicious. I think the white sweet potatoes are actually my new favorite. They have the same texture as an orange sweet potato, but they're a little bit sweeter, and it's kind of weird cutting into it. You think it's a normal potato, but then you bite into it, it's just like, oh, this is delicious. And then the purple sweet potatoes, cutting into them and just seeing that bright, beautiful purple color is unlike any other. It's definitely adds some beauty to any plate that you're gonna make it with, and it does taste really good as well. So sweet potatoes, awesome to grow. Another video that I'm going to be putting out is how to grow sweet potatoes from start to finish. We've done it for 3 years now, so I think I've got a pretty good handle on how to grow sweet potatoes. So again, if you want to see that video in the future, make sure you like and subscribe and hit that notification button, so that way you will be notified anytime we make a new video. So the next bed that we're going to work into is our back right corner. The first thing that we had there in the spring was some peas and some turnips. Had never grown turnips before, and they actually grew really well. I personally don't really like the flavor that much. They're kind of spicy. It's like an oversized radish, and most people use them in like stocks and soups, and that will probably help break down that flavor and spread it into whatever you're cooking it in. But it was still really fun to grow, seeing those huge heads just start to bulb up and those leaves come off the top. And we actually grew them under our little peas teepee. So we had our peas in a teepee shape, and then we had our turnips underneath it. So both the peas and the turnips grew really well. So I'll probably stick with that combination again this year, just to see if we get the same result. If I get it 2 years in a row, 2-3 years in a row, I would say that's a good combination, a good way to companion plant those vegetables, and I'll probably continue to use that into the future. Over there, we also planted some bush beans, and then we had our Swiss chard mixed in there as well. Swiss chard just does really well here. Swiss chard just grows pretty much in any weather that we have here. So it is a staple. It's pretty. You get nice yellows and oranges and reds and greens, and the greens are just so dark, and they're packed full of nutrition. I could take some Swiss chard, chop them up super finely, throw them in some mashed potatoes, mix them in. You won't even know they're there, and it just gives you a added benefit of nutrition into whatever your meal you're making. So if that's something that you're interested in, definitely check it out. But we did have some volunteer tomatoes grow over there as well, and we had this one cherry plant that I remember pulling out, and I could not believe how long the roots were. The roots were easily 5 feet long from that area, and that cherry tomato plant was just producing like crazy. We got hundreds and hundreds of tomatoes off of that plant. So it's pretty cool to see that over there. Even though it wasn't wanted, or I didn't want it to grow in that area, eventually I wound up pulling it out. But we definitely did get a lot of use from that area before that happened. Kind of pulling around that area of our keyhole bed is where we started to grow our sweet and hot peppers. And peppers this year, big win. They did really well. We grew 7 types of peppers: Corona, Jupiter, Purple Beauty, Jalapeno Serrano, Banana, oh, and Golden Cal. Can't forget that one. That was definitely delicious. But they all grew really, really well, starting to figure out how to care for our pepper plants. And I'm actually trying something out. I don't think it's gonna work, but I figured, I might as well try, and that's overwintering our pepper. So what I did was cut all the foliage off, because obviously that foliage is gonna die if it gets exposed to a frost. So what I did was cut all the foliage off and cut back the stems about 2/3 of the way. And we're gonna see if they survive the winter. Pepper plants are perennials, so they will keep growing every single year. If you live in a really cold climate, you can actually take the pepper plant out of the ground and put it in a pot and bring it inside under a grow lamp over the winter, and then when spring rolls around, you could just plant that plant back out into the ground or into a pot, and then it will grow the next season. So my thought is that if I continue to leave the pepper plant in the same place that it is in, it will grow stronger and stronger and stronger every single year, and I'm gonna get better and better peppers every single year. So really there's no risk for me to take trying to leave those peppers in the ground where they're at. And if they grow next year, awesome. If they don't, then I know that I'm gonna have to take them out of the ground, pot them and overwinter them properly in my greenhouse or either inside, so that way they don't get killed by the frost over the winter. Coming around that bed, we had our eggplants, which I'm not a huge fan of, but we did make some delicious eggplant parm with our eggplants this season. We grew a Chinese eggplant, which is more of like a longer, thinner eggplant, and we made some stir fries with those that turned out really well. So yeah, overall the eggplant did well. Those plants get big, so you have to plant your eggplants at least 2 feet apart just to give them the space, because they kind of grow up and then they canopy out at the top, and then the eggplants hang down. So I would either grow them in a pot individually or make sure that you have enough space in your garden to successfully grow them. And they are heavy feeders, so you do have to keep them up on a nutrition plan throughout the year. Lastly, on that side of the garden, we had our tomatoes, and our tomatoes got absolutely destroyed by rats this year. And the rat pressure that we had in the beginning of the season was unlike any other. I think it was a combination of us getting some more chickens, and also we had our chicken feeder where our food was out all the time. So the rats just had a buffet every single night. Eventually we took that food away, and what did the rats do? They ventured into our garden and literally ate every single tomato. So I was pretty disappointed about that. I did get over it eventually. I tried growing some tomatoes in the greenhouse. They still found their way in the greenhouse. So it was really, really frustrating, but we wound up getting our rat problem taken care of, and then we did start to see tomatoes by the end of the season. This year, I'm hoping to mitigate that rat problem early on, and then hopefully grow some beautiful and delicious nice big tomatoes is what I want. We grow cherry tomatoes for days here. We never have a problem with growing those, but I really want to grow some really good aromas and some beefsteak tomatoes just like everyone else does. So one thing I'm going to be doing this year is creating a tomato area in the garden. From my research, what I found is that tomatoes like to grow in the same soil every single year. So I'm going to do that from now on. I'm going to grow them in the exact same spot every single year until I start to see that blight or pest pressure come on hard, and then I'll probably rotate them around just to kind of refresh that soil, try to get any of the pathogens or anything out of the soil that are going to affect my tomatoes. But I'm going to be building a extensive trellis structure so that way I can lean and lower my tomatoes. So if that's something that interests you, definitely follow along this year and you'll see what that looks like in the future. Working back into the main part of the garden where we have our L beds were some watermelons. So we grew our sugar baby watermelons in there. We grew 3 plants, and the sugar babies, they only grow to be about 7 or 8 inches in diameter. But when you cut them open, they're just like a deep red color, and you bite into them and they're super sweet, hence sugar baby. And they're really easy plants to manage because they don't get really big like a typical watermelon. So if you are interested in growing watermelon, you want to grow watermelon, but you don't have a big space for you to grow them in, I would highly recommend growing the sugar baby watermelon. And after our watermelon started to fade away, that's where we succession planted our squashes that we had. And in the beginning of the year, we actually had broccoli there, which grew reasonably well. So multiple benefits out of that bed. And then our last 2 beds, walking into the garden right to the left, that first L bed, we originally had lettuce, so a mixture of head lettuce and leaf lettuce. And in the spring, the lettuce it does amazing here. So that's definitely the time for us to grow lettuce. It really sucks how hot it gets in the summer because we cannot grow lettuce here at all. And I'm just craving those leafy greens in the middle of those hot summer days. So we try to grow as much of it as we can during the spring and the fall. I find that lettuce grows better in the spring. However, we do have some in the garden right now in the fall, but it obviously grows a lot slower, and then we usually start getting it toward the end of winter, beginning of spring. So we just have a lot of lettuce for the first 3 or 4 months of the year. The last bed is our center bed where we attempted to grow our cucumbers, and we also had marigolds mixed in. And the cucumbers this year were probably the worst crop that we grew, surprisingly. Last year we were picking pounds and pounds and pounds, like cucumbers that we were just giving away, like literally giving away 30 pounds of cucumbers at a time because our plants were just cooking out so many cucumbers. It was unreal. So it was actually kind of a break this season, but still you want to get some cucumbers right. I think we got maybe 12 cucumbers this season. So pretty surprising to see. It was almost as if the cucumber started to grow and then it would just get a hard blight and then it would just die off. So I wound up pulling those plants out because I didn't want it to infect any other plants that we had in the garden. And I think that was a good choice. The marigolds that were growing in there actually wound up being beautiful, again, growing really well. I guess they were just taking advantage of that high nutrition in that soil, which made them just pop up. So we still did get some benefit in those garden beds. Well, that pretty much sums it up for everything that we grew inside of the garden this year. And I know this video is long already, so I want to compress this as much as I possibly can. But I wanted to talk about the other things that we're doing that are not in the garden, but around the homestead. So very quickly, we have our blackberries that we planted that are now over a year old, which are growing really well. So we have blackberries and raspberries both in the back left part, just behind our garden. And I'm super excited to get some blackberries and raspberries out of those plants this year. Coming on the other side of the greenhouse over here, closer to our home, we have our blueberries, which are going to blow up. They are high bush blueberries, which are native to this area. So I'm expecting them to grow amazing, and they're gonna get to be about 6 feet tall. So they're gonna be creating an awesome hedge that's going to block our house from our neighbors, which, you know, gives us some privacy, but we're also going to be getting delicious edible fruit off of those. And then even further behind them, in the lowest part of our yard, we put in a rain pollinator garden, and that is gonna provide so many benefits. Since it's in the low part of our garden and we have some pretty heavy clay soil in specific parts of our yard, we're going to be directing a lot of our rainwater there, and those plants are gonna thrive. They're gonna attract lots of butterflies and other pollinators, and they're gonna be near our other berries and fruit trees, so that's really gonna help with the cross-pollination that's required to grow those berries that we want. And lastly, we planted some new fruit trees in our yard. Last year, we planted 4 fruit trees, 2 pear trees, a fig tree, and a peach tree, and unfortunately we did lose some of those, as I talked about before, but we're trying again this year. We've done some more research, and I'm more confident on where I have placed our new fruit trees. So we have 2 pear trees. One of them is closer to our house on the other side in front of the garden, and then we have a pear tree which is behind me, the Comis pear tree, as well as a pomegranate and a mulberry tree. So I'm really excited to get this amazing variety of fruit. And one thing that I really need to focus on with those is fertilization. Get them on a plan, make sure that they're growing healthy and strong, because those are gonna be 3, 4, 5, 10-year investments down the line, but we're not gonna be getting fruit off of those for the first 3 to 4 years. So I need to make sure I establish them really well, so that way we get strong harvests later on in the future. So I know I didn't touch on the fruits and the berries and the pollinator garden as much as I did on the garden, but I'm always posting about these things on my Instagram and TikTok. So if that is something that interests you and you want to follow more of that, be sure to follow our Instagram and our TikTok. Usually those things are the same, just reaching out to different communities that are on either platform. But if you want to see more of the daily, day-to-day interactions of us here on the homestead, definitely check out our Instagram, where we post a lot on our stories. We try to give you a daily up-to-date, just what we're doing here in our area. And if you want to see those short snippets, you know, 2-3 times a week, then definitely check out our TikTok, where we post more fun and exciting things on there. So overall, I can't say really anything bad about this 2021 season. We had some failures, we had some great successes, and all we need to do is learn from those things. And as I said before, take what we learned, take what was successful, keep applying that into the future. And if it remains successful, keep applying it on into future. Take the things that weren't so successful and learn from them this year, learn what you could do better, and apply that into next season. I hope you guys really enjoyed this video and got something out of it. If you want to find out any more information, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. As I said, that's going to give you access to all of the new content that we're creating, and you could see how all of the things that we talked about in this video start to develop over this season in 2022. Again, my name is Phil from Earth Nails and Tails, and I hope you guys enjoy, and I'm super excited to see you next time.